Thank you, Rabbi. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It is such an honor to do what I do, and this yearly event is an enormous honor. So I thank the Rabbi for setting it in motion, and I thank the Kahal for allowing it to continue. I want to make a confession. I will start by saying Yitro was my bat mitzvah portion 46 years ago this week. Okay, don't do too much math because then you'll know how old I am. And I also want to be completely open and remind you that 2 years ago, when I did the anniversary drashah on my first year as president, it was also Yitro. Don't think that I didn't go into that file drawer in my desk, pull out that drashah and go, oh, I could do it again. But I knew, of course, with this group it would never fly, because somebody in the back, Solzalkin, somebody would remember and say, hey, wait a minute, we already heard this. So I'm here with some new words of Torah, thankfully inspired by Rabbi Kleinbaum. Parshat Yitro tells the story of Moses relating to his father-in-law Yitro about the exodus from Egypt and all of the actions that God took to rescue the Israelites from the hands of the Egyptians. And Moses' father-in-law Yitro is completely bowled over by these stories and is convinced of God's supreme power. As a consequence, he offers a sacrifice and celebration. It's very good that our ideas of celebration have changed since then, but that was what they did in the time. But Yitro's visit, of course, doesn't end here. He is a good father-in-law, and he wants to know how things are going with Moses. And of course, he has some suggestions to make. We're told that Moses is adjudicating cases day and night and is overwhelmed by his responsibilities. And Yitro, from the outside, looking in, sees this broken system and points this out to Moses. All father-in-laws, of course, are very good at giving advice from the sidelines. And Yitro tells Moses, what you're doing is lo tov, it is no good. And Yitro, thinks Moses must share the burden and share this responsibility with the capable men that are part of the community. Yes, back then it was men, so let's try to be optimistic and say men is a generic term. And he needs to go to these men and appoint them as judges so that he can take away some of that burden and share it, and he can be responsible for the big picture. Now, hence was born a system of governance that presaged democracy. This seems like a very, very big deal in the evolution of Israelite history. And then, of course, because I love the way Parshas just sort of attach things at the end, like, oh, and by the way, this other thing happened, and we're going to tell you before we move to the next Parsha. At the very end, guess what? The Israelites, they camp at the foot of Mount Sinai for 3 days. The mountain fills with smoke. Can't you just see that? And the 10 Commandments get delivered from God. Okay, that's quite a segue, or at least that's not a segue in my book, the way I was taught how to write, but it's okay. It's allowed to happen. And I love the fact that things just happen in Torah and there isn't any necessary change that links the activities one-to-one. And also, it might be true of my drash, but you'll tell me later if you feel like that as well. So in talking to Rabbi Kleinbaum about this parsha, she suggested that I read a commentary from Rabbi Shimon Felix that discusses marginality. You might be thinking, marginality? What does that have to do with Yitro? Hang on. One of the most interesting things I found about Yitro is the fact that it's the parsha that gives us the 10 Commandments. And the 10 Commandments are arguably one of the really super duper important parts of the Torah. Maybe not the most important, but really it ranks up there. And it's interesting that this portion is named after a pagan priest. Okay, he happens to be Moses' father-in-law, but nonetheless, he's someone from completely the margins, completely outside the community. It's also Yitro, our man on the margins, who comes up with this brilliant system of judges to oversee the newly free Israelites. This is a really, really important evolution and a change, and all of these ideas are coming from the mind of someone outside the community, someone truly on the margins. It seems to me then that the Torah is telling us very distinctly to listen to the people on the margins. It's outsiders who will have invaluable contributions to your society and by extension your religion and your life. The perspective gained from listening to outsiders can often be the missing piece when we're struggling with an intractable problem. I know that all of us out there have had that experience of feeling stuck and confused about the next step, whether it's a task, a piece of writing, making a decision, and finding inspiration from someone from the outside who mentions something new that just makes everything click. This, of course, leads me to think about CBST in this, our 50th anniversary year. We were founded as a community for people who'd been made marginal within Judaism. No corners of the Jewish world accepted gay people in 1973. So our marginalized group formed its own shul so that both Jewish identity and gay identity could be celebrated simultaneously. As time went by, as you know, our ranks grew. And rather than trying to blend in with mainstream Judaism, as many of you in this room know, we never actually joined a movement. We stayed outside of that. We exalted our gayness, we celebrated it, and we blessed it. In fact, you could argue that this outsider status actually came to a head during the AIDS epidemic, when so many of us just burst out of the closet, demanding equality and mercy in the throes of this deadly disease. This brings me back to our friend Yitro, our man on the margins, who doesn't stay with the Israelites, despite all of the miraculous things that Hashem has provided. He goes back to Midian with his outsider status still intact. Technically, CBST may no longer be on the margins of Jewish society, but we retain that memory as a crucial part of our identity. Our continued existence is a potent reminder of that journey, and one that we will never forget. In celebrating our 50th, I've been looking back at the evolution of CBST and how it changed and grew by listening to the marginalized. Yes, I've been doing my homework, and I have finished rereading Rabbi Cohen's book. It is amazing. If you don't have it, you must own it. I will personally visit your houses and confirm that you do. I think one of the reasons that CBST grew and became stronger is because we listened to those on the margins. We worked hard to creatively meet the spiritual and political exigencies of the day. We also refused to accept a stagnant or hidebound vision of Judaism. And this brings me to another idea, which is, why do you think it took us 19 years before we hired our first rabbi? We hung on quite tenaciously to that outsider status for a very long time. And I believe that the internal struggle at CBST around hiring the first rabbi, and if you've read the book, you'll know all about it, was a reflection of just that. And how grateful are we that the community found a way to welcome Rabbi Kleinbaum and still be true to its values and history. In thinking about this concept of marginality, I can't help but connect CBST and its place in the larger Jewish world to that trope. When CBST was founded, we were so far in the margins as to be nearly invisible. However, over time, our voice became louder and clearer, and our mission of a deeply spiritual Jewish community, standing up for LGBTQ rights and for compassionate social justice values, began to resonate more strongly across all bands of liberal Judaism. Suddenly, gay people are welcome in most synagogues, and we don't feel like outsiders, mostly. CBST should feel proud of all the ways in which we have enriched and deepened the modern Jewish experience. We've challenged the establishment, and we have demanded equality. We are, of course, not finished, but we've made important strides. This work, my friends, is really the fruit of our long and successful partnership with Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum. Rabbi Kleinbaum had the vision to see where we could go in 1992. She had the energy and the enthusiasm to chart a course forward for us, and she never stopped valuing the fact that we will always be just a little bit on the margins. Valuing this marginality, I believe, is what keeps CBST true to our mission. We started this journey very much on the margins, trying to carve out a space for ourselves where we could be both Jewish and gay. We were given important gifts by others who were also on the margins. Remember Jacob Gubai? He was so marginalized, right? As Rabbi Kleinbaum told us, he could have been threatened with deportation, but he went ahead and formed CBST. We are fortunate that CBST was able to hear them back then, and it's my wish for each of us to pay attention to the Yitros in our own lives. I hope CBST will continue to pay attention to its Yitros as well. Shabbat Shalom.